Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and the expansion of War Within is drawing closer and closer and closer, with the pre-patch announcement arriving likely at some point either this week or over the next few weeks. The expansion is almost here, and at some point players will have to make the choice of which class they'll look to main and invest most of their time into during the first season of War Within. And even right now players are still scrambling to figure out which class is going to be the one. And honestly, the decision couldn't be any more difficult, as this expansion we're getting quite an expansion for every single playstyle, with so many different hero specs serving kind of as a sub-spec to distinct playstyles that are going to shape and change and alter how your character is going to play going forward. So far, I get to spend a ton of time over in the alpha and the beta. I get to experience so many different playstyles, and I've so far been able to nail it down to just 6 classes that I could, as of this moment, see myself actually maining in the War Within. For me, I definitely want to play a class going forward that has some potential for end game progression, whether it comes to PvP, dungeons, or raiding, but at the same time I also want to play a class that I personally enjoy. And I also gotta enjoy the hero talents that are available and how they shape and alter the gameplay. So I've been able to settle on 6 specific classes that I could actually see myself main for now in the War Within. That being said, War Within beta is still ongoing, the development process is still happening, and this change of what my main could be could potentially change over these next few crucial weeks. But for now, this is currently the list of classes that I could main as of this moment. In no particular order, I want to start things off with the class of Death Knight, which has been a ton of fun for me to revisit every couple of days. The Death Knight itself, especially when it comes to its hero talents, I think stands out apart from the crowd, especially when it comes to Rider of the Apocalypse, a hero talent that I think does everything that I would want hero specs to be able to do, to be able to give a class thematic gameplay, while still retaining a familiar feel in terms of your rotation, but adding your benefits, bonuses, and even in some cases solving some core class issues, such as giving the Death Knights, a class that's not super mobile, the ability to ride around on a charger, either through Death's Charge, which replaces Death's Advance, or a passive option such as on a paler horse. Especially when it comes to dungeon and raid content, testing out Death Knight with the Death Charge ability is a huge convenience feature, as Death Knight's mobility is generally something that is a challenge for them from expansion to expansion, and Ride of the Apocalypse easily solves it. And even the other 2 hero talents also offer quite a bit on the table, with the Deathbringer, which focuses on big bursty damage and some execute priority gameplay, or Sin Lane, which focuses on empowering your major cooldowns as a Blood or as Unholy Death Knight. As for the Death Knight changes in particular, from my time spent testing, Blood Death Knight feels very good to get into, and it's getting even more utility with Gorfien's Grasp able to silence your foes, which is going to be excellent in Mythic Plus content. I'm also a big fan of the talent tree structure that we saw with Unholy, as well as some of the newer talents that gives them a little bit more flexibility in how they end up customizing the overall playstyle. And even though the Spec of Frost retains majority of its familiarity, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing, they did get a couple of new capstone additions towards the bottom rows that give you a couple of different options of how you can build Death Knight, offering some more hybrid capability to find the perfect medium, while still reinforcing the good old favorite builds that players enjoy, like a 2-handed Obliteration Death Knight or a dual-wielding Breathless Zaragoza build. Mages is another class that's also gone through a ton of good changes in the War Within beta, which sets him up as probably one of my favorite range class, or at least one of the 2 range classes that I got to spend my time with. For the hero talents, I'm actually surprised how we saw the Spellslinger evolve over time, especially for Arcane and Frost, where it became a very passive option, which was good, but just not interesting, and then they really changed it up with the Spell Frost teachings. A huge fan that I think makes a very solid choice. Then you have Sunfire, which also is a very popular choice for a lot of fire mages generally, and even arcane mages when it comes to pure single target and pure burst phases. But I can't forget to talk about Frostfire as well, because out of all the hero talents, I don't see nearly as many players play this one. And at the very beginning, players were excited for Sunfury as well as Spellslinger, but not as much about Frostfire until I gave it a proper shot, and I'm in love with this one as a combo with a Fire Mage for his insta-casting nature, big crit synergy, and I just love the way that you can combine Frost and Fire abilities together, like being able to drop Meteors and Living Bombs as a Frost Mage, or being able to proc Comet Storms as well as Ice Novas for free as a Fire Mage, and the way that it kind of fuses all together. Fire in particular is also a spec that's gone through a number of changes, especially with the way that the living bomb mechanic works, and it seems that they're still trying to figure out the tuning, but for the most part, I enjoy this type of gameplay when it comes to lit fuse and how it can synergize with your hero talents as well as with your cooldowns. And I feel that the way the fire mage is constructed right now, it's almost like a big Lego block of a character, and there's so many different ways that you can build up your character, either focusing on things such as living bombs and lit fuses, pyroblast talents, phoenix flame talents, or even ignite. In contrast to that, whereas Fire got a ton of new changes, Frost for the most part retains a lot of its familiarity, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Not every player wants to be walking into the next expansion having to fully relearn the character from scratch all over again, so Frost is that spec that's going to have a bit more of that familiar identity, though even this spec has gotten a couple of adjustments in order to bolster what is familiar when it comes to the gameplay, but also when you add that together with some of the hero towns, there is still quite a bit of that new variety. But the spec that's gotten probably the best amount of changes, not the most, not the least, but literally the best in my opinion, has been Arcane so far. One of the focuses of this expansion has been to try to take certain playstyles that are overly complex or maybe top-end heavy and try to reduce some of the top-end complexity out of it. And rotationally, the spec is a lot more fluid and flexible, especially when they made Nether Precision proc off of your Arcane Barrages or Arcane Blasts, which kind of helps hit all aspects of your spec, whether you're doing AoE content or single target. And overall, the class of mage has gotten so many changes week by week over on the beta, and I feel like with this much attention and this much effort spent into the mage, it is hard not to put him as a class that I could potentially see myself maining and enjoying in the next expansion. Another class that I could easily put on this list is the Warlock, which has gone through a ton of updates. Huge fan of the hero talent adjustment that this class has gotten, and probably one of the best ones that I've seen so far. Plus, the actual Shivara set that you'll be able to wear for season 1 looks absolutely amazing. Huge fan on the visual front, thematics front, but also when it comes to the basic gameplay of the class of Warlock and the updates they've gotten. But like I said at the beginning, the biggest highlight of this class so far has been the hero talent options between the Hellcaller, Soul Harvester, and the Diabolist. There's just so much goodness to look forward to when it comes to picking up a Warlock in this expansion. Starting off with the Diabolist, which is the ultimate summoner playstyle that's available for Destro and Demonology. For Demo, they're definitely not a stranger to that kind of a gameplay, but for Destro, it does help enhance you quite a bit, as each demon that you summon, from the Overlord to the Mother of Chaos to the Pit Lord, all end up giving you additional gameplay output. An overall Diabolist, I think, is another one. Just like the Rider of the Apocalypse Death Knight, I think it is the peak when it comes to a good example of a hero talent. It has flavor, it has thematics, it has its own identity, but also it doesn't really step on the toes of the spec for Destro or Demo, and synergizes with it super well, where it lets you weave itself into your basic rotations. Hellcaller is another one that I think is worth highlighting because it really allows you to embrace the damage overtime components of a Warlock, especially as an Affliction Warlock. And a lot of Warlocks missed the days when Affliction was primarily a dot class first, and filler abilities were filler. They weren't the highest abilities out there in terms of your overall damage. They were just something to do when you don't need to refresh your dots. And Hellcaller gets to recapture that fantasy altogether. Even as a destruction, if you want to run around as a dot-heavy destruction warlock, you can with the Hellcaller, which allows for a completely different set of gameplay that has been so fun to play into. But I should also mention the Soul Harvester, which has a bit of a power dynamic to it, depending if you're Demo or Affliction, where for Demonology, I feel like it does decent enough. You basically get to house in a demon inside of your soul, and if you spend soul shards, that demon can then lash out at your targets. Demonology, for the most part, is rewarded for consuming demonic core charges, which allows the demon within to help you gain even more charges a little bit quicker. But for Affliction, it's a little bit more interesting because it's a bit more of an inverse from Hellcaller. Whereas Hellcaller is focused on dot gameplay, so Harvester uses those dots to empower many of your abilities, with a huge emphasis on Shadow Bolt and Nightfall procs, as well as Malefic Rapture, where Shadow Bolts can actually do more damage per active dot on your target. With improved Shadow Bolt, it also buffs the damage even further and allows certain abilities like Haunt to proc guaranteed Nightfall procs, and Nightfalls buff your bolts, and consuming Nightfalls grants you more procs from Soul Harvester, which gives this nice little synergetic rotational feel about it. And besides this, every single spec of Warlock has gone through a variety of different updates when it comes to their base talent tree, with a lot of their talents no longer costing nearly as many nodes, where Affliction really gets to embrace that full damage over time components, with plenty of new and familiar capstones for them to utilize as well. Demonology sees the return of a Doom Guard with a Pact of Eredruin, which was a tier set from Dragonflight, and it also gains new ways for you to shape and change your Vile Fiend into either a Charhound or a Gloomhound from the raid of Antorus. And even Destruction got a much needed update to their talent tree, with a couple of different capstones for you to invest into, with things such as a Overfiend that you can now summon that rains destruction on your foes instead of a Blasphemy, and new ways for you to augment some of your other base abilities with familiar nodes, but also some new ones, such as new ways to amplify Dimensional Rift. But the biggest benefit of their talent tree is going to be the fact that you now have a lot more talent points to invest and customize your build instead of feeling pigeonholed, which is how a lot of Desert Warlocks would describe their feel of the class in the current version of Dragonflight. Now, another class that I didn't think they would put on this list when I initially started to put it together back during the alpha and into the beta of War Within would be the class of the Evoker. This was until I started to really explore all of the hero talents from the Chrono Warden, the Flame Shaper, and the Scale Commander, and the more I played with it, the more I fell in love with this class altogether. The only major changes you'll see for the class of the Evoker will be in the class tree and some spec tree adjustments, things such as Renewal Blaze becoming a little bit easier to pick up, as well as a new choice between Time Spiral, which allows your allies a bit more movement, or Spatial Paradox, which grants an ally, usually a healer, the ability to cast their spells while on the move, while also increasing the range of their abilities. Initially, this was only an augmentation buff, but now it's available for the actual class itself, which I think helps make Preservation, Aug, and Dev all a little bit more even amongst one another, while still allowing augmentation to retain the buff gameplay value. As for the actual gameplay, I think the Chrono Warden is a really good support playstyle that is offered. It isn't super heavy on its main ability or capstones, but the different buffs that it offers you for both augmentation and preservation, I think allows it to be the perfect support playstyle that will be favorited by preservation and augmentation players. Though if you want to do a little bit more offensive value as preservation, I found Flame Shaper, amazing. The ability of Engulf has an offensive or a defensive component that can either be used to heal an ally for every single hot they have, or damage an enemy for every dot they have. And there's a lot of synergy with Fire Breath ability in particular, which allows Preservation to adopt a more aggressive build, because Live Giver's Flame allows them to heal nearby allies for the damage that the Fire Breath does, but Flame Shaper can interact with the Fire Breath ability, causing it to detonate instantly. And this hyper-aggressive playstyle of Preservation as a Flame Shaper, I think has ultimately become my favorite build. Preservation has always had an aspect of just raw damage as part of its basic kit, with its Deep Breath ability as well as Fire Breath, but Flame Shaper really helps to harness that aspect, turning your offensive abilities into a heal, which I'm a huge fan of as someone who plays Disc Priest, Holy Paladin, and Mystery of a Monk. And last but not least, we have the Scale Commander, which essentially enhances both augmentation and devastation, allowing their disintegrates or eruptions to be a little bit more focused or cleave multiple targets after using empowerment abilities, allowing allies to focus targets with bombardments, and even letting control where they go with maneuverability, where they can channel Deep Breath or Breath of Eons while being able to change the direction as they fly by, which simply enhances both those playstyles tremendously. It's a huge boon for devastation, but actually surprisingly insanely good for augmentation as well. Aug being primarily a buff and support type of a class that actually can gain quite a bit of offensive power using Scale Commander benefits, combined together with things like Molten Embers, which allow Fire Breath to unlock a damage aspect of their gameplay, and even things such as Rumbling Earth, which gives your upheaval an aftershock component, which allows you to actually retain quite a bit of offensive power as primarily a bonus buff type of support class, which I think is a huge step forward when it comes to PUG content, but also playing augmentation as more of a DPS class rather than a support class, if that is how you choose to play this role. And the very last class on this list will have to be the Warrior, which I feel like is a class that I end up playing just about every expansion, at least as an alt, if not a proper main. For the most part, Warriors saw a ton of quality of life updates when it comes to their talent tree, which allows them to pick up things such as Reflect, Fear, Shockwave, and Rally easily, no matter which build the Warrior you decide to pick up. When it comes to Warrior gameplay, I really fell in love with the hero talents in particular. Slayer is an insanely fun choice for both Arms and Fury that initially caught my attention and was really fun from the get-go. It's a Blaze Storm focused hero talent, which both specs, Fury and Arms, can benefit from, since all of them have access to the talent of Unhinged, which allows them to, during Blade Storm, to either Bloodthirst or Mortal Strike at nearby foes, which is a huge benefit for Fury Warrior. And the playstyle itself primarily focuses on building up for big execute windows and executing the targets. So it's a playstyle that focuses on Blade Storms and meaty, fat executes, and that by itself is enough for me to get excited about the prospect of potentially playing a warrior just because of the playstyle of Slayer in particular. Colossus Arms Warrior also is another perfect choice if you're a huge fan of setting up for mad big burst windows inside of your Warbreaker every single Warbreaker. The damage of the actual demolish ability that is present for the Colossus does a ton of burst damage and has a fairly short cooldown with some cooldown reduction components involved. And the playstyle even has certain other benefits like a defensive bonus for prot and even a crowd control immuning element for either of the two specs. And then we have the Mounted Thane, which you don't see played nearly as often, but it is the most visually pleasing thematic hero talent by far. With Mounted Thane as a spec of Fury, for instance, you essentially replace the ability of Whirlwind with Thunderclap, which allows Thunderclap to gain all of the different cleave benefits of Whirlwind. And every so often that Thunderclap turns into a Thunderblast, which has such an awesome visual aspect to it, creating a gameplay where you're running around as a big mountainous colossus with lightning and thunder striking all of your foes with just about every stomp, which is incredibly satisfying to look at. And the playstyle itself is also quite strong, has quite a bit of consistency to it, and even some defensive benefits for Protection Warrior also. Now, I did sneak in one more class into the list, just kinda as a bonus, since Rogue is my current main in Dragonflight. And it'd be hard for me not to at least mention this class at some point when it comes to talking about a future main for The War Within. Plus, I mean, look at the Rogue's tier set, it looks fantastic. This seems like it would be the perfect expansion to start playing one with a set that looks as good as this. However, for the class of Rogue, it feels like the last time we had any communication was about 2 months ago. While the class did get a couple of updates here and there when its class talent tree and the spec trees for Outlaw, Assassin, and Subtlety, it does still have a lot of problems to consider before officially maining a Rogue. For example, the class still is fun, but it has a number of documented bugs that keep you from being able to fully test out the class on the beta. And the class talent tree as it is set up actually has rogues walking in weaker into War Within than they were in Dragonflight. And even the hero talents have a lot of potential in them, just it doesn't really translate super well into gameplay as of this moment. You see the idea what they were trying to do with the hero talents, but they don't have that it component. They don't have a gameplay hook or a very interesting aspect to it that really captures it like every other class has been able to do thus far. Like for instance, as a Subtlety rogue as a trickster, there are some interesting components like Unseen Blade, proccing from single target attacks to debuff the target, making them take more damage. And even some interesting stuff with finisher damage output, faster secret techniques, and even Nimble Flurry that gives you cleave for your single target abilities, which could make it kind of like a blend between an Outlaw rogue Blade Flurry cleave, but still as a Subtlety rogue with Shadow Strikes and backstabs. However, a lot of these talents seem good on paper, but don't necessarily work consistently. Plus, Trickster has this coup de grace ability, which is supposed to grant you a powerful finisher of Eviscerate or Dispatch as either of the two specs. With Flawless Form, you would think that would be a really good benefit since that amps all of your finishers, but the animation lock for coup de grace, but also a little charge ability has been awkward and widely talked about in the rogue communities as a playstyle that doesn't feel that good, and that feedback has been delivered every single week so far on the beta. There's a lot of cool ideas, but in practice, a lot of players would actually talent out of coup de grace, otherwise it actually makes the rest of the playstyle not feel that good. Deathstalker is another one that has a lot of single target potential and has gotten better and more consistent over the last few weeks, but still has a lot of issues when it comes to certain talents and the idea behind what they want to do with them, but it still does some questionable things like covering all of AoE components of Subtlety, but not Assassination, making certain talents better for one spec than the other. And then we have the Fadebound, which kinda is a very passive option that you see no interactivity with whatsoever in terms of your basic gameplay. It has great benefits for Outlaw and Assassination when it comes to single target or AoE, but not a lot of interesting rotational changes. And in fact, that's kind of the problem with all three of them, from Trickster to Fadebound to the Deathstalker, all of them have a lot of passive bonuses. And sure, there are some slight gameplay changes here and there, depending on the spec, depending on the hero talent, but a vast majority of the elements of them are passive and not rotationally impactful. However, I still hold out hope that maybe over the next few weeks before the expansion is released, hopefully sometime soon, we will see some kind of an adjustment for rogues that will give that gameplay hook that a lot of players are looking for. Plus, every guild requires a traffic poison in the roster anyway, so if you play a rogue, you basically have a pretty good guarantee that you are going to be brought into every single raid fight. But there has been a reason why, out of all the different classes over in the beta, I'll probably spend the time on the rogue the least during alpha and beta. And this is more of a compliment than anything, because they've been able to do so much cool stuff with every other class in the game. There's so many awesome gameplay outputs and so many cool interactions, and the way that you could build out classes and all the different talent changes. I've actually had an insanely good time during the beta of War Within, and there's been so much good to explore. Just a good portion of all that time that I've had having fun has been on classes other than Rogue, but I still do hold out hope. But with that being said, that is going to be the entire list of classes that I could see myself currently potentially maining in the next expansion. And the clock is slowly running out, as it's actually drawing up on us very soon, with the pre-patch for War Within arriving shortly, with the expansion following after. But with that, I want to pass out the question to you guys in the comments down below. Have you yourselves picked which class you're most likely going to be maining in the next expansion? Or do you at least have it narrowed down to a couple of different choices? I would definitely like to hear what classes are you currently looking forward to in the comments down below. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.